Let's look at lessons on God's invitation, paying taxes, marriage in heaven, and love in Matthew 22. What's our response to God's invitation? What does God expect us to wear? Let's look at the parable of the wedding banquet. Did many refuse to accept the invitation? Jesus spoke to them again in parables, saying the kingdom of heaven's like a king who prepared a wedding banquet for his son. He sent his servants to those who had been invited to the banquet to tell them to come, but they refused to come. Is this an allegory of salvation, the world's most important invitation? The king invites us politely. The decision is ours. What did others choose? Did some even insult and kill the messengers? So he sent other servants to them. The feast has been prepared. The bulls and fattened cattle have been killed, and everything's ready. Come to the banquet. But the guests he'd invited ignored them and went their own way, one to his farm, another to his business. Others seized his messengers and insulted them and killed them. How did the king respond? When the king heard that, he was angry and sent his armies, destroyed those murderers and burned their city. Were those who refused the invitation declared unworthy? Is this a picture of the invitation now open to Gentiles too? Then he said to his servants, "The wedding party's prepared, but those who were invited weren't worthy. Therefore go to the roads on the edge of town and invite everyone you find to the wedding party." Is the invitation to both bad and good people? They went out on the streets and brought in everyone they could find, good and bad alike, and the banquet room was filled with guests. What happened to one of the guests? But when the king came in to look at the guests, he saw there a man who had no wedding garment, and he said to him, "Friend, how did you get in here without a wedding garment?" He was speechless. Then the king said to the attendants, "Bind him hand and foot and cast him into the outer darkness. In that place there'll be weeping and gnashing of teeth." Why is appropriate clothing important? For many are invited, but few are chosen. We clothe ourselves with Christ. When we're baptized, we put on Christ. Salvation's only possible in Jesus Christ, and those who ultimately refuse Him refuse salvation. What's our response to God's invitation? Will we choose the right clothing? Let's accept God's invitation and those He sends with the message. Shall we wear the right clothing, putting on Jesus every day? You decide. Ought Christians to be good citizens? Is paying taxes a participation in evil acts by human governments? What's the difference between love and idolatry of a country? Let's look at the moral dilemma of paying taxes. Was Jesus deceived by obsequious flattery? Then went the Pharisees and took counsel how they might entangle him in his talk. And they sent out to him their disciples with the Herodians, saying, "Master, we know that you're true, and teach the way of God in truth. Neither do you care for any man, for you don't regard the person of men. Tell us therefore, what do you think? Is it lawful to give tribute to Caesar or not?" It was a trap. What did Jesus say about what they were doing? But Jesus perceived their malice and said, "Why are you testing me, you hypocrites?" Should we Christians always be nice, even to those who abuse us? Jesus answered their trap bluntly. "Pastor, beware. When your new church flatters you while vilifying the previous pastor, they may soon betray you. If they speak kindly of the previous pastor, they may also treat you with kindness." Schmoozing can seem encouraging, but beware of the ambush. Jesus was not fooled by their insincere flattery. How wisely did he reply? "Show me the coin used for paying the tax." They brought him a denarius, and he asked them, "Whose image is this, and whose inscription?" A false dilemma or false dichotomy suggests that only one of two sides is right, but both may be right or wrong, and there may be other options. In an immoral world, we pay tribute to corrupt governments and to God. Poor Jews often lost their lands to unjust, excessive Roman taxes. They also didn't want to serve a false god, Caesar. Roman coins often called Caesar divine or a son of divinity, blasphemous claims which offended Jews. Whose image was on the coins? And what did Jesus say to that? Caesar's, they replied. Well then, he said, give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, and give to God what belongs to God. Jesus was not asked about worshipping Caesar, but paying taxes. We owe governments for the use of their roads, and many other things, just as we owe God for his providence. How did they react to Jesus' wisdom? When they heard it, they marveled, and left him and went away. It is impossible to live and work in this world without handling tainted things like money. Jesus' answer addressed the practical reality of life in an evil world. We cannot change the whole world. Should we begin with ourselves, love our neighbors, and prepare for our part in God's heavenly reign? You decide. What puzzle did the Sadducees put to Jesus? That same day, Sadducees, who deny that there's a resurrection, came to Jesus. They asked, Teacher, Moses said if a man who doesn't have children dies, his brother must marry his wife and produce children for his brother. Now there were 7 brothers among us. The first one married, then died. Because he had no children, he left his widow to his brother. The same happened with the second brother, and the third, and with all 7 brothers. Finally the woman died. At the resurrection, which of the 7 brothers will be her husband? They were all married to her. Was Jesus tactful or blunt with them? Jesus answered, You're completely wrong. You don't know what the scriptures teach, and you don't know anything about the power of God. What was Jesus' explanation? For in the resurrection, they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like angels in heaven. And as for the resurrection of the dead, haven't you read what was said to you by God? I am the God of Abraham and the God of Isaac and the God of Jacob. He's not the God of the dead, but of the living. And when the crowd heard it, they were astonished at his teaching. Does this also explain who the sons of God were? Angels or men? Is there a love greater than marital love? Will the love we experience for all eternity be so far above marital love that we won't miss it at all? You decide. What was the Pharisees' question about the greatest commandment? Let's learn from Jesus. When the Pharisees heard that he'd silenced the Sadducees, they came together, and one of them, an expert in the law, asked a question to test him. Teacher, which commandment in the law is greatest? Does Jesus' answer summarize Christianity? When we teach what neither Jesus nor the apostles taught, are we like the Pharisees and Sadducees? How can any church claim to be apostolic, yet add dogmas not taught by Jesus or the apostles? If he was here on earth today, would we accept him? Did Jesus expound the 10 Commandments or other commandments from the Hebrew Scriptures? Jesus said to him, You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and great commandment. Mark adds a 4th word because the Greek more fully explains the Hebrew word, mind, with 2 words, mind and strength. And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind, and with all your strength. This is the first commandment. The Shema Yisrael, Hear, O Israel from Deuteronomy, teaches us to love God with our entire heart. The soul, breath or spirit, thirsts for God like a deer panting for water, a passionate spiritual desire. We assemble with others who love God, pray, study the Bible, and meditate on godly things. An anti-intellectual bias contradicts the Bible. because Jesus taught us to love God with our minds. How much do we love God? My soul longs, yes, even faints for the courts of the Lord. My heart and my flesh cry out for the living God. Does agape mean divine love? No, agape does not always mean divine love. It can refer to the wrong kind of love. Men love darkness, the praise of men more than God, and this world. What kind of agape does God expect? Loving God is neither just emotional, nor intellectual, nor just spiritual, but includes all those dimensions. Jesus taught us to love God with all our heart, soul, strength, and mind, and our neighbor as ourselves. What about the second great commandment? Do the law and prophets, the whole Old Testament, hang on the 10 Commandments or something else? The second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. Upon these 2 commandments hang the whole law and the prophets. The world shows reckless disregard for others. The second great commandment is a version of the Golden Rule. This is so fundamentally important that even non-Christian religions and atheists recognize it as valid. If we say we love God and hate our brother, we're liars. If we love our brother and disobey God, we believe a social gospel. If we love God with our hearts but not our minds, we worship emotionalism. If we love God with our minds and not our hearts, we worship intellectualism. Let's look at the Messiah riddle. While the Pharisees were gathered together, Jesus asked them, "What do you think about the Messiah? Whose son is he?" "The son of David," they replied. He said to them, "How is it then that David, speaking by the Spirit, calls him Lord? For he says, 'The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I put your enemies under your feet.' If then David calls him Lord, how can he be his son?" No one could say a word in reply, and from that day on no one dared to ask him any more questions. Why did David refer to his son or descendant as my Lord? The Messiah is divine. God invites us to participate in a love that's infinitely greater and more fulfilling than marital love. Do we accept his invitation? You decide.